Paddle to the Sea by Holling, Clancy, and Holling, chapters 4, 5, and 6. Brooke and Beaver Pond. There's all the beavers. The canoe rushed down a snowy canyon with steep sides. The busy brook backed it, pushed it forward, rolled it under, and set it on, and finally dumped it into a quiet water of a pond. Beavers had made this pond by building a dam of logs and sticks plastered with mud. To do this, they had gnawed down trees. The stumps of the trees showed here and there along the banks. In the middle of the pond, the beavers had built their home, an island of sticks with an underwater entrance safe from enemies. Inside, on a shelf above water level, the nest of soft rushes would be warm and dry. An old beaver crept out of the water, sleek and dripping, to sit on the roof and scratch himself in the sun. A buck deer waded in the shallows. He had only one antler, and the weight of it made him walk with his head turned aside. He swung the antler hard against a stump. It came off easily and dropped into the mud. He shook his head and bounded off into the forest, glad to be free of the weight. By fall, he would grow a new set of weapons. A mink dived off a melting snowbank and came up with a fish. A muskrat swam past the drifting canoe and disappeared in the dead rushes. A skunk met a porcupine on a log. Each looked disgusted, turned about, and waddled solemnly away. The flooding pond burst through a corner of the beaver dam that afternoon. Old leaves with paddle in the midst of them pushed through the gap. Paddle to the Sea was free. The little canoe rushed on with the brook, on towards the river. Chapter 5. Breaking Up the River. On a warm day, perhaps the very day the snow had melted and started Paddle on his journey, the breakup of the river had come. All through the winter, the river had lain frozen. Wild animals had used it as an ice trail. Lumberjacks had used it as a road for taking their horses and tractors to the logging camp in the forest. But they had not hauled their logs to the sawmill this way. Instead, they had piled them up along the frozen banks, waiting for the river to carry them when the spring breakup came. And now it had come. Hundreds of brooks and streams had been flooding the river under the ice. The water, pushing from beneath, forced the ice upward. The bank shook as in an earthquake. Up and down the river, the glass pavement cracked all over. The cracks split open. Blocks of ice began to move downstream. Faster and faster, a foaming river roared through the forest where the frozen trail had been. Paddle's canoe tumbled along with the brook until with one last leap it shot into the middle of the mad current of the river. The ice in the lumbermill's logs crushed in on every side. Escaping again and again, Paddle raced on. The river rounded a bend. Logs and ice plunged out of sight without warning. Paddle, too, plunged forward through mist over the falls. He was still bottom side up in the water when a lug rushed over the falls behind him, striking the canoe with such a hard blow that it was wedged into a crack of the shaggy bark. And when the log raced away, it carried Paddle to the sea with it, upside down and underwater. Chapter 6. Paddle meets a sawmill. Paddle's log was 4 feet thick. Timbers and ice crushed against it, but it floated so low in the water that the canoe, held snugly underneath, was well out of danger. Hours went by, days passed. In time, the river widened into a bay dotted with islands. The ice disappeared, and rivermen in spiked boots leaped from log to log, prodding them with long pike poles towards the sawmill. The mill, a mass of red buildings on stilts above the riverbank, opened its wide mouth in the main building. From the mouth ran the log chute, a giant tongue licked into the water. A heavy chain of spikes moved up the center of the chute, turned over a wheel, and returned to the river, an endless belt called a bull chain. Rivermen pushed the logs onto the spikes, which carried them up the chute into the open mouth. A buzzing noise, which sometimes became a shriek, came from inside the mill. Great saws were at work. The spikes dug into Paddle's log. The great tree rolled over, bringing Paddle upright and dripping out of the water into the sunlight. The riverman shouted with surprise as Paddle rode his log up the bowl chain. At the top, he was heaved through a door onto a carrier that looked like a flat car. Ahead, the saw, an endless belt of thin steel, raced so fast its teeth were a blur. Paddle's log was being pushed nearer and nearer to the hungry saw. Paddle to the Sea, chapters 4, 5, and 6.